There was a moment in your life when everything could have ended. A moment so dark, so final, so completely without visible hope that the only thing standing between you and the end of your story was something you could not see, something you could not prove, something that the logical part of your mind had no category for. And yet, here you are, still breathing, still present, still in a life that should, by every natural calculation, have been over. What stood in that gap between you and the ending was not luck. Stay right here. Because what I am about to share is going to change how you see everything you survived. Not everyone who watches this will have faced physical death, but every person who has walked a genuinely difficult road, every chosen one who has been through the kind of season that takes everything and leaves you with almost nothing, knows what it feels like when something fundamental about your existence is under threat. When the thing that is knocking at the door is not just difficulty, but ending. The end of a marriage that was your whole world, the end of a career that was your identity, the end of your health as you knew it, the end of a relationship that you built your sense of self around, the end of a financial life that took years to construct, the end of hope itself, that particular and devastating darkness when you can no longer see any version of your future that is worth moving toward. Death comes in many forms, and every person reading this knows at least one of them personally. What I want to talk about today is not the death itself. It is what stood between you and it. What was present in the gap, invisible, unprovable, inexplicable by the logic of what was happening around you, that held the door. That kept the ending from being final. That sustained something in you through a season where everything that was supposed to sustain you had already run out. Because something did stand there. And understanding what it was and why it was there is one of the most important things you can do with the survival you have been given. Let me start with honesty. I do not know the specific shape of what you survived. I do not know whether it was a medical crisis, a mental health crisis, a relational devastation, a financial collapse, a trauma that arrived without warning and rewrote everything about how you understood the world and your place in it. Only you know that. Only God knows the full weight of what it cost you and what it took to come through it. What I do know, because it is consistent across every story of genuine survival I have ever encountered, is that there was a moment in the middle of it where your own resources ran completely out, where everything you had been relying on, your strength, your faith, your strategy, your support system, your will to keep going, reached its end, where you arrived at a place that is beyond what human beings are designed to navigate alone. And something happened there, in that beyond human place, something that was not you. The scripture is full of this moment. It appears in different forms, in different stories, in different cultural contexts, but the shape of it is always the same. The Red Sea in front of the Israelites and the Egyptian army behind them and no visible way through. Daniel in the lion's den with the stone rolled across the entrance and no natural means of escape. Jonah in the belly of the great fish, about as far from any human possibility of rescue as a person can get. Paul and Silas in chains in prison at midnight with no legal recourse and no visible help coming. In every single one of those stories, the moment of deepest impossibility was immediately followed by the most dramatic divine intervention. Not because God was waiting to see how bad things would get before he stepped in, but because the moment of complete human resource depletion is the moment when what God does becomes unmistakably, undeniably his. When there is nothing left that human ingenuity or human effort or human connection could have produced, and something happens anyway, the only honest accounting of it is God. You had that moment, the moment where your resources ran out and something stepped in. And I want to spend this message helping you understand what that something was. Not in vague spiritual language, in as honest and grounded and real a way as I know how to use. The first thing that stood between you and the ending was the permanence of God's purpose for your life. This is not a comfortable teaching. It is not the kind of thing that sounds warm and reassuring in the way that spiritual content is often designed to sound. But it is true, and truth, even when it is challenging, does the most lasting work. God does not create people for purposes and then abandon those purposes when the person's circumstances become difficult. He does not invest the specific, careful, intentional design that he invested in you, the gifts, the calling, the specific combination of depth and capacity and sensitivity that makes you who you are, and then step back while that investment is destroyed before it has had a chance to fully produce what it was designed to produce. This does not mean that nothing bad happens to God's people. The evidence of Scripture and the evidence of human history make it absolutely clear that people who are deeply loved by God and specifically called by God walk through devastating things. Job, Joseph, David, Paul. The list is long and the suffering is real. God does not guarantee the absence of death knocking at the door. What he guarantees is that the door will hold, not because you are specially protected from difficulty, but because the purpose he placed in you is not finished. Because the story he is telling through your life has not reached its final chapter. Because the people who are connected to your purpose, the ones whose lives are going to be changed by what you carry, whose breakthroughs are linked to your faithfulness, whose path forward is illuminated by the light that your story produces, have not yet been reached. The door held because the story is not over, and the story is not over because God is still writing it. The second thing that stood between you and the ending was a grace that operated below the level of your awareness. There is a dimension of God's protection that most people never recognize because it operates invisibly. Not the dramatic intervention that you can point to and say, that was God. The quiet, consistent, moment-by-moment grace that sustained you through the season when you were not even aware of being sustained. The strength that was present in your body when by every biological measure you should have had none. The clarity that arrived in your mind at the exact moment when a decision needed to be made that would change the trajectory of what happened next. The person who called at exactly the right time without knowing why. The word that landed in your spirit from an unexpected source that gave you just enough to keep going for one more day. None of those things felt supernatural in the moment. They felt like small mercies, like fortunate timing, like the ordinary comfort of a friend who happened to be paying attention. But look at the accumulation of them. Look at how many of those moments of just enough grace arrived at exactly the moments when just enough was all that stood between you and the ending. The consistency of that timing is not explainable by coincidence. Coincidence does not operate with that kind of precision across that many moments in that specific sequence. That was grace, working below the surface of your awareness, sustaining what your own strength could not sustain, keeping you present in a season when everything in you wanted to leave. The third thing that stood between you and the ending was the prayers of people you may never fully know. This one requires a moment of real stillness to receive. Because most of us, when we think about what carried us through our hardest seasons, think about the visible support, the friends who showed up, the family members who called, the counselor who said the right thing at the right time. These are real, and they mattered. But there is another category of prayer that most people never see and rarely think about. The person who felt a sudden, unexplained burden to pray for you on the exact night you needed it most. The grandmother in a prayer group somewhere who did not know your name but prayed for someone who is struggling tonight with a specificity and a fervency that reached heaven on your behalf. The friend of a friend who heard about your situation secondhand and lifted your name before God in a private moment that you will never know about. The spiritual world is not individualistic in the way we tend to think. It is deeply, intricately interconnected. And the prayers of people who love God, even prayers that are not specifically directed at you, even prayers from people who do not know you, create a spiritual atmosphere that has real practical consequences for the people within reach of those prayers. You are within reach of prayers that you did not know were being prayed, and some of those prayers, in ways that will only be fully visible in eternity, stood between you and what was trying to reach you. Welcome back, chosen one. Let me take you deeper into what it means, right now, in this present moment of your life, that you survived what you survived. Because the survival is not just a fact about your past, it is an instruction about your future. And understanding it as an instruction rather than simply as a relief or a testimony or a chapter that is finally behind you is what changes everything about how you move forward. But first I need to address something that many survivors carry in silence. Something that is almost never talked about in spiritual content because it is uncomfortable and because it does not fit the triumphant narrative that we prefer to tell about surviving hard things. The guilt of survival. Not everyone who faces what you faced came through it. Not everyone who walked to the edge of the same kind of ending turned around. Not everyone who was in a similar darkness found the same light. And sometimes, in the quiet moments, in the moments when you are honest enough with yourself to feel things you would never say out loud, there is a question, a painful, heavy, genuinely difficult question. Why me? Why did I come through when others did not? What makes my life the one that continued? This question is not faithlessness, it is humanity, and it deserves a real answer rather than a spiritual platitude. The honest answer is you do not fully know, and that not knowing is one of the hardest things about survival. God's sovereignty, the reality that He is working a plan across all of human history that is far larger and far more complex than any single human perspective can encompass, means that the specific decisions about whose story continues and whose does not are not decisions that human beings are equipped to fully understand. Job asked this question. The Psalms are full of this question. The greatest spiritual thinkers in human history have sat with this question and found that it does not resolve into a clean answer. What we can say, honestly, without pretending to know more than we know, is this. Your survival is not evidence that you are more deserving than those who did not survive. It is not a grade on your spiritual performance or your faith level or your worthiness as a person. It is simply and profoundly the fact that your story has more chapters, that the purpose you carry is not yet complete, that the people connected to your future have not yet been reached. That is enough of an answer. Hold the question with honesty and hold the answer with humility, and then move forward. Now let me talk about the specific thing that survival does to a person who receives it with open eyes. Because there are two ways to survive something, and the difference between them determines almost everything about what the survival produces in a person's life going forward. The first way to survive is to simply outlast, to endure until the thing ends, and then, as quickly as possible, put distance between yourself and the memory of it. To treat the survival as a chapter that is over and that has no particular claim on the chapters that follow, to recover, to stabilize, to return to as normal a life as possible, and to let the difficult season become a thing you went through rather than a thing that formed you. Many people survive this way. There is no condemnation in it. Survival is survival, and it is worth honoring in whatever form it takes. But there is a second way to survive, and it is this: to receive the survival as a commission, to come through the difficult thing with the eyes wide open to the question of why. Not in a tormented sense, not as guilt or as the impossible burden of having to justify your own continued existence, but in the sense of genuine, forward-facing, purposeful inquiry. What do I now carry that I did not carry before? What did this season build in me? What do I understand about darkness and about God and about human resilience that only someone who has been where I have been can understand? And what am I supposed to do with that? This second way of surviving is what transforms a difficult past into a purposeful future. And it is the way God is inviting you to move forward. Because what you carry now, on the other side of whatever it was that knocked at your door, is not the same thing you were carrying before it happened. The person who came through is not identical to the person who went in. Something was lost, yes. Losses are real and they deserve to be mourned honestly. But something was also gained, something that cannot be acquired through comfortable seasons or favorable circumstances or the deliberate pursuit of spiritual growth in the absence of genuine testing. The specific knowledge of God that comes from having needed Him at the level you needed Him. Let me explain what I mean by that. Most people's relationship with God is primarily conceptual. They believe certain things about Him, His love, His power, His faithfulness, and those beliefs are genuine. But beliefs that have not been tested remain at some level theoretical. They carry the weight of ideas rather than the weight of experience. And ideas, however true, do not sustain a person in the moment when death is knocking at the door. Experience sustains a person in that moment. The memory of God being faithful in a previous impossible situation. The knowledge, not the belief, the knowledge, that He showed up before, and therefore can be trusted to show up again. The settled, visceral, body-level certainty of a person who has actually been in the place where human resources run out and has personally experienced what is there when they do. You have that now, not as a concept, as a lived reality. And that kind of knowing, the kind that was built in the fire rather than learned in a classroom, is one of the most valuable things a human being can possess. It is unshakable in a way that conceptual faith simply is not, because it is not dependent on circumstances being favorable or feelings being present or the theological argument being airtight. It rests on what you know from your own experience. God was there, in the middle of the impossibility, present in the gap between you and the ending, real in a moment that was more real than anything comfortable had ever been. You know that. Nobody can take that knowing from you. Now let me speak about what God is asking of you in response to that knowing, not as a burden, as an invitation. He is asking you to let the survival speak, not necessarily from a stage or a platform or in a formal context, though for some of you that is exactly where the survival will eventually speak. But in the ordinary, daily, unremarkable moments of your life, in the conversations that come up unexpectedly, in the relationships where you encounter someone who is in the middle of what you came through, in the moments when a person who is standing at their own impossible place needs to hear from someone who has stood there and found that the ground held. Your survival gives you access to those moments in a way that nothing else could. When you speak about what you went through, honestly, without false polish, without the cleaned-up version that omits the parts that were genuinely ugly and genuinely hard, something happens to the person listening. Something that the most eloquent theological argument or the most carefully constructed spiritual content cannot produce. They feel less alone. Not because your situation matches theirs exactly, but because the quality of honesty you carry, the realness of having actually been in the impossible place and having found something real there, creates a resonance that bypasses the intellectual defenses of a person who is in too much pain to engage with polished content. You are not just a survivor. You are a witness to the specific, personal, real faithfulness of a God who stands in the gap when the gap is too wide for anything human to bridge. That witness is needed, more than you currently know. Now let me address something practical and important, because this message is not only about the theological and spiritual dimensions of your survival. It is about the living that comes after. Surviving something significant, especially something that involved a real encounter with the possibility of ending, changes a person's relationship with time, often in ways that take a while to fully understand and navigate. Some survivors find themselves with a new and fierce appreciation for ordinary moments that they previously took for granted. Others find themselves struggling with a kind of restlessness, an inability to return to the ordinary rhythms of life that feel trivial in the light of what they experienced. Still others find that the survival created a clarity about purpose that they did not have before, a sharpened sense of what matters and what does not, of where to invest energy and where not to, of who to be close to and who to release. All of these are real responses to real survival, and all of them contain a gift, if they are received with honesty and navigated with patience. The restlessness that makes ordinary life feel trivial is pointing toward purpose. It is the internal signal of a person who has been through something that gave them a larger perspective, and who now needs a life that is large enough to match that perspective. The clarity about what matters is one of the most practically useful things a person can carry, and survivors who lean into it rather than suppressing it often find that it becomes the compass that navigates the rest of their life more accurately than anything that came before. Pay attention to what the survival clarified for you. That clarity is not coincidental. It is directional. God does not take people through the fire and leave them unchanged. He does not permit the encounter with ending without also providing in that encounter the seeds of a new and deeper understanding of what the continued life is for. The clarity you carry out of your survival is part of His instruction, part of the commission that comes with the continuation of your story. Lean into it. Let it shape the decisions that are ahead. Let it tell you where to invest and where to release, who to be close to and who to love from a healthy distance, what to build and what to let fall away. What is worth the effort of your limited, precious, hard-won days and what is not? You have a perspective now that most people around you do not have. Use it wisely. Use it well. Use it generously. For the people in your life who are still trying to figure out what matters, who have not yet been through the thing that makes the question suddenly urgent and clear, let me close with this. Death knocked at your door. Whatever form that knocking took, However the ending presented itself, however close it came, whatever it cost you even in the surviving it knocked, and the door held. Not because you held it, you were not strong enough to hold it, not because the circumstances changed in your favor at exactly the right moment, though sometimes they did, but because something, someone was standing on the other side of that door, a God who had more for you to do, a God who had people connected to your future who needed you to still be here. A God who had chapters of your story left to write that could not be written if the door did not hold. A God who loves you with a love that the theological word unconditional does not come close to adequately describing, who was present in every moment of what you went through, who felt every moment of it with you, who did not look away, who did not remove himself to a safe distance from your pain, who was there in the darkest, most impossible, most final feeling moment, holding the door. The door held. You are here. That is not a small thing. That is everything. And the life that continues from this moment forward, every ordinary Tuesday, every unremarkable morning, every conversation and relationship and decision and day, carries the weight of having been given back, of being lived on the other side of a door that held when it could have opened. Live it with that awareness, not with the heavy, anxious consciousness of someone who feels the pressure of having to justify their survival with exceptional achievement, but with the quiet, settled, deeply grateful awareness of someone who knows, from the most personal and most real experience possible, that their life is not their own, that it was given back, that the giver had reasons, and that those reasons are unfolding in every chapter that comes next. You are still here. That is the miracle. Now live like it is.